pulling up to the coffee shop now. Don't go anywhere. And Elena, what I'm about to tell you is going to change everything you think you know about that divorce settlement. The espresso machine hissed like an angry cat as Elena waited, watching the morning crowd through rain-streaked windows. 3 minutes later, Sarah Chen burst through the glass doors, her usually perfect appearance disheveled, her designer coat buttoned wrong. She looked like she had run a marathon or seen a ghost. "Sarah, you look like you've seen a ghost," Elena said as her best friend slid into the booth across from her. "Maybe I have," Sarah replied, her hands trembling as she pulled off her coat. "Elena, what I'm about to tell you about Marcus and that divorce settlement, it's going to destroy everything you thought was true." Elena felt the baby kick hard against her ribs, as if responding to the tension in the air. "What about the divorce settlement? The papers are signed. It's done." Sarah shook her head, tears already forming in her eyes. "That's what we all thought. But Elena, I discovered something yesterday that's kept me awake all night. Do you remember that man you saw me with last month outside the law offices downtown?" Elena nodded slowly. It had been an awkward moment. She'd been leaving her attorney's office when she spotted Sarah across the street with a tall, dark-haired man she didn't recognize. When asked about it later, Sarah had been evasive. "That was my brother David," Sarah continued, her voice cracking. "My brother David, who's an immigration lawyer. Elena, Marcus hired him 3 years ago. Hired him for what? To help create evidence of an affair that never happened. An affair between you and David. To invalidate your prenuptial agreement and justify giving you nothing in the divorce?" The words hit Elena like ice water. "What are you talking about?" Sarah leaned across the table, gripping Elena's wrist. "Marcus was planning this divorce for years. Elena, he was going to claim you were having an affair to break the prenup, then leave you with massive debts while he kept all the assets. But David couldn't go through with it. When he realized what Marcus was really planning, he started documenting everything." Elena's mind reeled. "But I got the house. I got money. The settlement seemed fair." "Elena," Sarah whispered, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "According to David's research, you didn't get anything that was actually Marcus's to give. You got things that were already legally yours." The baby kicked again, harder this time, and Elena pressed her hand to her side. "I don't understand. The businesses, Elena, all of Marcus's companies. David found documentation that shows they're not in Marcus's name. They're in yours. They've been in your name for years." Elena felt the world tilt sideways. "That's impossible. That's what I thought too. But Elena, David has proof. Every major business decision Marcus made over the past 15 years, every company he started, every investment he made, it was all done using your legal identity. You've been unknowingly financing and legally owning a billionaire empire." The sounds of the coffee shop, the chattering voices, the grinding espresso machine, the rain against windows, seemed to rush back in a wave of overwhelming sensation. "Why would he do that?" Elena asked, though part of her was already beginning to understand. "Because if anything went wrong, if any business failed or faced legal trouble, it would all come back to you, not him. Marcus has been using you as a shield between himself and financial liability for 20 years. Elena thought about all the papers Marcus had brought her over the years. Business documents, he'd said. Routine paperwork for his growing empire. She had signed them without reading, trusting her husband completely. "Sarah, are you telling me I own Marcus's companies? I'm telling you Marcus doesn't own any companies. You do. And Elena, that divorce settlement you thought was generous. You essentially gave Marcus permission to keep running businesses that legally belong to you." Elena stared at her best friend, trying to process this information. If it was true, then everything she thought she knew about her marriage, her divorce, and her future was a lie. "There's more," Sarah said quietly. "David said Marcus was bragging about how brilliant his plan was, how he was going to end up with everything and leave you with nothing but debt, and you'd never even know what hit you." The baby chose that moment to kick so hard it took Elena's breath away. As she gasped and rubbed her side, she couldn't help but think her unborn child was telling her it was time to fight back. "Sarah," Elena said when she caught her breath, "I need to see those documents, all of them. I was hoping you'd say that. David's been waiting to help. But he was afraid Marcus would destroy him professionally if he spoke up without proof that you wanted to know the truth. Elena looked around the familiar coffee shop where she had spent countless mornings over the years, where she had first met Marcus 20 years ago, when they were both young and ambitious, where she had believed their love story began. Now she was beginning to understand it might have been where her 20-year nightmare began instead. "Set up a meeting with David," Elena said, her voice stronger than she felt. "It's time I learned the truth about my own life." As Sarah nodded and reached for her phone, Elena felt something shift inside her. The naive, trusting wife was gone. The woman sitting in this coffee shop now was someone different, someone who was about to discover just how much power she actually had, and someone who was finally ready to use it. 3 years earlier, Elena had thought she knew exactly who Marcus Wellington was. She had been wrong about everything. But now, for the first time in 20 years, she was going to find out who Elena Wellington really was, and Marcus was going to discover that his biggest mistake wasn't underestimating his wife's intelligence. It was overestimating his own cleverness. The game was far from over. In fact, Elena was beginning to realize it had only just begun. 20 years earlier, in this same coffee shop. Elena Martinez was 22 years old and running on 3 hours of sleep and pure determination. Her communications degree from Columbia was still warm, and she had just landed her first real job at a boutique marketing firm in Midtown. The pay was terrible, the hours were brutal, and she had never been happier. She was reviewing client portfolios at 7 in the morning, her small table covered with papers and color-coded folders, when a deep voice interrupted her concentration. "Excuse me, is this seat taken?" Elena looked up to find a tall man with dark hair and piercing blue eyes standing beside her table, coffee cup in hand. He wore an expensive charcoal suit but had loosened his tie, and something about the confident way he smiled made her stomach flutter with nervous energy. "Oh, no. Go ahead," she said, hastily gathering her papers to make room. "Thanks. I'm Marcus. By the way, Marcus Wellington." He extended his hand as he settled into the chair across from her. "Elena Martinez?" His handshake was firm, confident, lasting just a moment longer than necessary. Everything about him seemed to radiate success and certainty. "What's got you working so intently this early in the morning?" he asked, nodding toward her stack of documents. "New job," she explained, suddenly self-conscious about her discount blazer and drugstore makeup. "I'm trying to make a good impression at a marketing firm." "Smart strategy. Mind if I ask which firm?" When she told him, his eyebrows rose with genuine interest. "Really interesting coincidence. I just launched a tech startup, and I've been looking for someone creative to handle our marketing strategy. The universe works in mysterious ways." Elena felt her pulse quicken. This gorgeous, successful man was interested in her work. It seemed too good to be true. "Tell me about your company," she said, leaning forward despite herself. Marcus's eyes lit up as he described his vision. "It's revolutionary, Elena. A platform that's going to change how small businesses manage their customer relationships. But here's the thing. I'm not thinking small. I believe in dreaming big, really big. Most people think small because they're afraid of failure. But I'm not afraid of anything." "That sounds amazing," Elena said, captivated by his passion and intensity. "It will be," Marcus said with absolute certainty. "But success isn't just about one company. Elena, it's about building an empire, multiple businesses, diverse investments, creating something that lasts generations. And someday, when I find the right partner, I want to share all of it." The way he said partner made Elena's cheeks flush. What kind of partner? Someone who dreams as big as I do. Someone who understands that real success requires taking risks, making sacrifices, building something extraordinary together. Marcus leaned across the small table, his voice becoming more intimate. "I can tell you're someone who has big dreams, Elena. I can see it in your eyes. That hunger, that ambition." "I think so," Elena said, though uncertainty crept into her voice. "Maybe. I mean, I want to be successful." "You will be," Marcus said with conviction. "I can help you with that. We could help each other." They talked for 2 more hours. Marcus told her about his vision for transforming entire industries, about the millions of dollars he planned to make, about the life of luxury and influence he was building. He asked about her dreams, her goals, her fears about the future. "You know what I like about you, Elena," Marcus said as he prepared to leave for a meeting. "You're not jaded yet. You still believe in possibilities. Most women your age are already cynical about successful men. But you're different. Different how? You trust people. You see the best in them. That's rare, and it's beautiful." Marcus stood, straightening his expensive tie. "Elena, would you like to have dinner with me tomorrow night? Somewhere nice. I'd love to continue this conversation." "I'd like that very much," Elena heard herself say. "Excellent. And Elena, wear something elegant. I have a feeling tomorrow night is going to be the beginning of something extraordinary." As Elena watched him stride confidently out of the coffee shop, she felt like her entire life was finally beginning. Here was a man who saw potential in her, who wanted to hear about her dreams, who was clearly going places and might take her along. She had no way of knowing that Marcus Wellington had spent 20 minutes studying her before approaching, that he had already decided she was perfect for his long-term plans, that her trusting nature, her ambition, and her obvious inexperience with wealthy men made her an ideal candidate for the role he needed filled. Elena Martinez thought she had just met her future husband. Marcus Wellington knew he had just found his next business partner, the kind who would sign whatever documents he put in front of her without asking too many questions. 6 months later, the restaurant was the most expensive Elena had ever seen, with crystal chandeliers and waiters in white gloves. Marcus had ordered champagne that cost more than she made in a week. "Elena, darling, there's something I want to ask you," Marcus said, his voice serious as he reached across the pristine white tablecloth. "What is it?" Elena's heart was already racing. They had been dating for 6 months, and it had been like a fairy tale. Marcus had introduced her to a world of luxury she had never imagined. Broadway shows, weekend trips to his house in the Hamptons, dinners at restaurants where celebrities ate. "I'm going to build an empire," Marcus said, pulling out a small black velvet box. "Not just one company, but dozens. A business dynasty that will last for generations. And I want you beside me for all of it." Elena's hands shook as he opened the box to reveal a diamond ring so large it seemed to capture all the light in the restaurant. "Marcus, every single venture, Elena, every business decision, every investment, every milestone. I want us to be true partners in the most complete sense." His voice was intense with passion. "Your name next to mine on every important document, every major contract. What's mine will be yours, legally and completely." Elena stared at the ring, then up at this incredible man who had transformed her life in 6 months. Marcus's first company had already been acquired by a major corporation for $8 million. His second startup was attracting investors from Silicon Valley. He was everything she had ever dreamed of in a partner. "Yes," she whispered. Marcus's smile was radiant as he slipped the enormous ring onto her finger. "Now we're truly partners in everything," he said. "Your signature next to mine, building our future together." Elena believed him completely. She had no way of knowing that Marcus Wellington had just executed the first phase of a 20-year strategy, and she was not his partner. She was his insurance policy. The wedding day. St. Patrick's Cathedral had never looked more beautiful. 300 guests filled the pews, all successful, influential people from Marcus's expanding business network. Elena walked down the aisle in a Vera Wang gown that cost more than her parents' car, feeling like she was living in a dream. As she reached the altar, Marcus took her hands and whispered, "Today, everything becomes ours, darling. Every dream, every success, every dollar we'll ever make." "Ours," Elena repeated, meaning it with every fiber of her being. The ceremony was flawless. The reception at the Plaza Hotel was lavish beyond imagination. The honeymoon in Italy felt like something from a romantic movie. Elena had never been happier. During their first week as husband and wife, Marcus brought her a stack of business documents. "Just some paperwork to make everything official, darling," he explained, setting the papers on their hotel room desk. "Legal requirements for adding you to all my business ventures. Your signature here, here, and here." Elena signed without reading, completely trusting the man she had just married. She was too in love, too overwhelmed by the luxury of their new life together, to ask questions about legal details. "Perfect," Marcus said, gathering the signed documents. Now you're officially my partner in everything. Elena felt a warm glow of belonging. She was part of something bigger now, something important. She was building a future with the man she loved. She had no idea she had just signed away her identity for the next 20 years, that every signature would be used to create financial liability and legal responsibility she knew nothing about, that Marcus Wellington had married her not for love, but for her legal capacity to shield his business empire from risk. On that perfect June evening, as they danced on the terrace of their Italian villa, Elena Martinez Wellington believed she was living the beginning of her happily ever after. She was actually performing the opening act of the longest con game of her life, and she had no idea she was playing the mark, not the leading lady, but love made her blind to everything except the fairy tale she thought she was living. It would take 20 years for Elena to understand the difference between a fairy tale and a carefully orchestrated deception. By then, she would have signed her name to an empire worth hundreds of millions of dollars, an empire that legally belonged entirely to her, though she would have no idea it existed. Marcus Wellington was playing a very long game, and Elena Martinez was the perfect player for the role he needed filled. 10 years into their marriage, the sound of Waterford crystal clinking echoed through the marble foyer of the Wellington estate in the Hamptons. Elena descended the curved staircase in her black Valentino gown, the whisper of silk against marble creating a soundtrack for her entrance into what had become her carefully choreographed life. At 32, Elena had perfected the art of being the ideal millionaire's wife. Her dark hair was styled in a perfect chignon, her makeup was flawless, and her smile was practiced to radiate warmth without revealing too much personality. She had learned to be beautiful, charming, and most importantly, unobtrusive. "Darling, you look absolutely stunning," Marcus said, appearing at the foot of the stairs in his custom Tom Ford tuxedo. He was already entertaining their guests, powerful men in expensive suits accompanied by wives who looked like they had stepped directly from the pages of Town and Country magazine. "Thank you," Elena replied, accepting the perfunctory kiss he placed on her cheek. His attention was already drifting back to his business associates, treating her greeting like checking an item off his evening's to-do list. "Elena has such impeccable taste," Marcus told the group of investors and their wives. "Makes entertaining so effortless. I never have to worry about anything when she's handling the details." Elena smiled and made her way toward the terrace where 50 of New York's financial elite were enjoying cocktails in the view of their manicured gardens. This was her role now, the perfect hostess, the beautiful accessory, the woman who made everything appear seamless while remaining essentially invisible. It was a dramatic transformation from the ambitious young woman who had dreamed of building her own marketing empire. That woman had disappeared gradually, one small compromise at a time, until Elena could barely remember what her own dreams had looked like. "Elena, sweetheart, this house is absolutely divine," gushed Patricia Cromwell, the wife of Marcus's biggest pharmaceutical investor. "You simply must give me the name of your interior designer." "Actually, I designed most of the spaces myself," Elena said, feeling a small flicker of the old pride. "I studied interior design and art history in college, and I've always loved creating beautiful environments." "How charming," Patricia said with the kind of smile that never reached her eyes. "It's so important for wives to have hobbies. Don't you think something to keep busy while our husbands handle the serious business?" A hobby. Elena forced her smile to remain perfectly in place. Her degree, her natural artistic eye, her months of research into architectural history and design principles, all reduced to a mere hobby, something to keep her occupied while the real work happened elsewhere. "If you'll excuse me," Elena said politely, "I should check on dinner preparations." Sakura, she made her way back into the house, her heels clicking against Italian marble floors. As she passed Marcus's study, she noticed the door was slightly ajar and could hear his voice along with several others. The men had retreated there with their brandy and Cuban cigars for what Marcus always called real talk. Elena paused in the hallway when she heard her own name. "The thing about managing wives," Marcus was saying with the tone he used when dispensing business wisdom, "is understanding their limitations and working within them." Elena froze, her hand halfway to the door handle. "Your Elena seems perfectly managed," said Robert Hayes, whose pharmaceutical patents had made Marcus millions through their joint ventures. "Beautiful, sophisticated, stays completely out of business affairs." "That's the secret," Marcus replied, and Elena could hear the satisfaction in his voice. Keep them happy with the right lifestyle. Keep them busy with social obligations, but never let them think they're actually involved in real decision-making. But doesn't she sign documents for your companies? Asked James Morrison, Marcus's longtime business partner. I've seen her signature on major contracts. Marcus's laugh was cold and calculating. Elena signs whatever I put in front of her. She trusts me completely. Has for years. She doesn't read legal documents, doesn't ask questions about business details, just signs wherever I indicate. Elena felt her blood turn to ice. And if she ever starts asking questions, pressed Robert. She won't, Marcus said with absolute confidence. Elena's perfectly content with her role. She loves playing the sophisticated hostess, planning charity galas, decorating our homes. The wife is essentially decorative. Gentlemen, she keeps our domestic life beautiful, looks appropriate at social events, gives me credibility with family-oriented investors. But the real decisions, the empire building, the serious financial strategy, that's all me. Elena stood paralyzed in her $1,000 gown, holding her crystal wine glass, as the men she had been serving and smiling at for years discussed her like a piece of furniture. An expensive, attractive piece of furniture that performed its function adequately but wasn't expected to think. You've trained her well, James said with admiration. It's not training, Marcus corrected. It's selection. I chose Elena specifically because she had the right combination of intelligence and naivety. Smart enough to handle social situations, trusting enough never to question my judgment. The perfect wife for a man building what I'm building. Elena thought about all the papers she had signed over the years. Stacks of legal documents that Marcus would bring to her while she was having morning coffee or getting ready for bed. Just business paperwork, darling, he would say. Routine legal requirements for the companies. She had signed them all without reading a single page, trusting her husband completely. What exactly had she been signing? Elena, darling, Marcus's voice called from the study. Could you have Maria bring us another bottle of the Macallan 25? The good stuff. Of course, she called back, her voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside her chest. Elena walked to the bar, poured the $1,000 scotch into a baccarat crystal decanter, and carried it to the study where her husband and his associates were building their empires. They barely acknowledged her presence as she set down the tray. Thank you, sweetheart, Marcus said absently, his attention already back on his conversation about quarterly projections and market positioning. Elena left the room and climbed the stairs to her bedroom, closing the door behind her with deliberate calm. She sat at her antique vanity and stared at herself in the mirror. 32 years old, beautiful, wealthy beyond most people's imagination, and completely powerless in her own life. But as she looked at her reflection, something shifted. The woman staring back at her wasn't the naive 22-year-old who had fallen for Marcus's charm and promises. This woman had spent 10 years watching, listening, absorbing information about business and finance and power dynamics, even while pretending to care only about decorating and social planning. Elena opened her laptop, an expensive MacBook that Marcus had bought her for organizing her charity work, and began researching business law courses. If Marcus believed she was too decorative and trusting to understand what she had been signing, perhaps it was time to prove him spectacularly wrong. She enrolled in an online MBA program that very night, using a credit card Marcus had given her for household expenses. If she was going to be a signature on important documents, she decided it was time she understood exactly what those documents meant. Elena Wellington was about to get a very expensive education, and her husband was going to pay for it without even knowing. The golden cage was beautiful, but it was still a cage. For the first time in 10 years, Elena was looking for the key. She had no idea that Marcus had already ensured it was too late for her to escape. But it wasn't too late for her to understand the cage itself. And understanding, Elena was about to learn, was the first step towards something much more dangerous than escape. It was the first step toward taking control. 3 years later, the sound that shattered Elena's sleep at 12:47 a.m. wasn't her usual alarm or even Marcus stirring beside her. The bed was empty. Marcus's absences had become increasingly frequent as his business empire expanded into pharmaceutical investments and real estate development. He claimed late-night meetings and early morning flights, But Elena had begun to suspect other explanations for his disappearances. Her iPhone buzzed insistently on the nightstand. The caller ID showed James Morrison, Marcus's business partner and oldest friend. "Hello," Elena answered groggily, immediately alert. James never called this late unless something was seriously wrong. "Elena, thank God you answered." James's voice was thick with alcohol and something else. Guilt, perhaps, or fear. "Elena, is that really you?" "James, it's the middle of the night. What's wrong? Has something happened to Marcus?" "Marcus is fine," James said bitterly. "Marcus is always fine, isn't he? It's you I'm worried about. Elena, Christ help me. It's you." Elena sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake. In the 15 years she had known James Morrison, she had never heard him like this. Drunk. Yes, but never this emotionally raw, this desperate. "James, you're frightening me. What are you talking about? I can't keep this secret anymore," he said, his voice breaking. "I can't sleep. I can't eat. I can't look at myself in the mirror. Elena, you have to know. You have to know what Marcus has done to you." Elena's blood ran cold. "What has he done?" "The companies, Elena, all of them. Wellington Tech, Wellington Investments, Wellington Pharmaceuticals, Wellington Real Estate Holdings, Wellington Media Group, Wellington Energy Systems. Every single business Marcus has built over the past 15 years. What about them? They're not his, Elena. They're yours. Every company, every asset, every investment account, every piece of property, it's all in your name. Has been for years." The room seemed to spin around Elena. "That's impossible. Marcus owns those companies. He runs them." "No," James said, and she could hear him crying now. "He built them using your legal identity, your signature, your credit rating, your social security number, your status as his wife. Elena, if anything goes wrong with any of those businesses, if they fail or get sued or face bankruptcy, it all comes back to you, not him." Elena felt like she was drowning in her own bed. "I don't understand what you're telling me. Marcus has been using you as a financial shield for 15 years. Every risk, every potential liability, every possible legal consequence. You're the legal owner of everything, which means you're responsible for everything. If the empire collapses, you collapse with it. Marcus walks away clean." Elena thought about all those documents she had signed over the years. Stacks of papers that Marcus would bring her during breakfast or while she was getting ready for charity events. "Just business paperwork, darling," he would always say. "Routine legal requirements. James, are you telling me that I'm legally responsible for hundreds of millions of dollars in business debt?" "All of it," James confirmed. "But Elena, that's not even the worst part. There's more. He's planning to divorce you. Soon. Marcus has been setting this up for months, maybe years. He's going to claim you had an affair to invalidate your prenuptial agreement, then transfer all the real assets to new companies in his name, leaving you with nothing but the debt and legal liability." Elena felt the world collapse around her. "An affair, James? I've never had an affair. I've never even looked at another man." "I know that," James said. "But Marcus doesn't need you to actually have an affair. He just needs it to appear that you did. Elena, he's been documenting a false affair for over a year. Photos, witnesses, paper trails, all fabricated. But it'll look convincing in court." The pieces began falling into place with horrifying clarity. Marcus's sudden interest in her daily schedule, his encouragement for her to handle certain business meetings alone with male colleagues, his insistence that she attend social events where he would introduce her to specific men, then leave her alone with them while photographers happened to be present. "Oh my God," Elena breathed. "Elena, I should have told you years ago. Marcus is my oldest friend, and I hoped he would come to his senses. But tonight he laid out the complete timeline for me. 6 months. Elena. He's filing for divorce in 6 months, claiming adultery, and then liquidating everything into his new corporate structure. New corporate structure. Companies he's been setting up secretly for 2 years. Elena, he's been planning this longer than I realized, and there's something else you need to know." Elena's hands were shaking so violently she could barely hold the phone. "What else?" "He has a girlfriend, Victoria Hayes. She's 28. works in public relations, and she's been helping him plan this entire scheme. The new companies, they're being set up in her name. The words hung in the air like poison. Elena had suspected infidelity, but hearing it confirmed while learning about the systematic destruction of her entire life felt like being buried alive. "Elena, are you still there?" "I'm here," she said quietly. "James, I need you to help me understand exactly what papers I've signed and what they mean." "Elena, I can't. If Marcus discovers I told you any of this—" "He's not going to discover anything," Elena said, and something in her voice had changed completely. "Because you're going to help me figure out how to protect myself, and then we're both going to pretend this conversation never happened." There was a long pause. "Elena, what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that if I legally own these companies, then I have rights Marcus doesn't know I know about. And I'm thinking it's time I started exercising those rights." "Elena, you can't run major corporations. You don't have experience with or—" "No," Elena interrupted, "but I can hire people who do, and I can make decisions about what happens to companies that apparently belong to me." After she hung up, Elena sat in the darkness of her bedroom for a long time. 20 years of marriage, and she had been nothing more than a signature on documents she never read, a shield between Marcus and his financial risks, a disposable wife who could be discarded and destroyed as soon as she was no longer useful. But James had revealed something Marcus didn't realize. Elena wasn't just a victim of this scheme. She was also its primary beneficiary. If she really owned all those companies legally, then Marcus had spent 15 years building an empire in her name. Elena got out of bed and walked to her home office, turning on her computer. The online MBA program she had been secretly completing was about to become much more than theoretical knowledge. If she owned a business empire she had never known about, it was time to learn everything possible about running one. And if Marcus Wellington thought he could destroy her and walk away with everything, he was about to discover that his decorative, trusting wife had been getting a very expensive education behind his back. The game was far from over. Elena was just now learning the rules, and she was beginning to understand that Marcus had made one crucial tactical error. He had taught her to be ruthless. He just didn't know it yet. The next morning, Elena did something revolutionary. She made an important decision without consulting Marcus first. At 9 a.m. sharp, she called Helen Brooks, the razor-sharp attorney she had met at a Leukemia Society fundraiser, and scheduled an emergency consultation. "Mrs. Wellington, you mentioned on the phone that you have concerns about business documents you've signed," Helen said 3 hours later, as Elena sat across from her mahogany desk in a Park Avenue office that radiated legal competence. "What specifically has you worried?" Elena had rehearsed this conversation during her taxi ride through Manhattan traffic, but sitting in the prestigious law office with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, her carefully planned words seemed inadequate. "I think my husband has been systematically deceiving me about our financial arrangements for years," she said finally, "and I think I may legally own businesses that I know nothing about." Helen leaned forward, her expression immediately sharpening with professional interest. "What makes you think that?" "Someone called me with information suggesting that Marcus has been using me as some kind of financial shield, putting major business assets in my name without my knowledge to protect himself from liability." Helen's eyebrows rose. "Do you have documentation?" Elena pulled out a thick manila folder. "I spent the morning copying every business document I could find in Marcus's home office that has my signature on it. There are dozens of them." For the next 90 minutes, Helen methodically reviewed each document. Her expression grew increasingly serious as she examined incorporation papers, loan agreements, investment contracts, and property deeds. Finally, she looked up at Elena with something approaching amazement. "Mrs. Wellington," she said slowly, "you're not just married to a millionaire ex-husband. According to these legal documents, you are the millionaire. Actually, you're worth considerably more than that." Elena felt all the blood drain from her face. "What do you mean?" "I mean every major asset, every company, every investment account, every piece of real estate that Marcus Wellington controls is legally owned by you." Helen spread the documents across her desk like evidence in a criminal case. Wellington Tech Solutions, Wellington Investment Partners, Wellington Real Estate Holdings, Wellington Media Group, Wellington Pharmaceuticals, Wellington Energy Systems, 6 major corporations, Elena, and according to these incorporation documents, you are the sole legal owner of all of them. But Marcus runs them. He makes all the decisions, handles all the business operations. Legally, he has no authority to make any decisions, Helen said grimly. He's been operating these companies using power of attorney documents that you signed. But Elena, those powers can be revoked at any time by the actual owner, which is you. Elena stared at the papers spread before her, trying to process what she was hearing. How is this possible? How could I not know I own 6 major companies? Because someone deliberately and systematically ensured you didn't know? Helen replied, this is one of the most sophisticated financial manipulation schemes I've encountered in 25 years of practice. Your husband has been using your legal identity to build enormous wealth while protecting himself from any potential consequences. What kind of consequences? Helen pointed to several loan documents. Massive business debts, all personally guaranteed by your assets. High-risk pharmaceutical investments that could result in significant losses. Legal liability for any business practices that might be questioned by federal regulators. Elena, if any of these companies fail or face serious legal trouble, you could lose everything you own. Your house, your savings, everything. Elena thought about James Morrison's midnight phone call, about Marcus's plan to divorce her and leave her with nothing but debt and legal problems while he disappeared with his girlfriend. Helen, what would happen if I wanted to take actual control of these companies, not just own them on paper, but actually run them myself? Helen's expression shifted to something like admiration. You could do exactly that. In fact, as the legal owner, you have every right to do that. You could fire the current management, including your husband. You could restructure the companies, sell them, liquidate the assets, merge them, or shut them down entirely. Anything you wanted. Even without Marcus's consent. Elena, you don't need his consent for anything. These are your companies. He's been running them without legal authority, using powers you granted him that you can revoke with a simple written notice. Elena sat back in the leather chair, her mind reeling with possibilities she had never imagined. For 20 years, she had been the invisible wife, the decorative partner, the woman who signed papers and stayed out of real business. But according to these documents, she hadn't been invisible at all. She had been the only person who legally existed. There's something else you need to see, Helen continued, pulling out Elena's prenuptial agreement. This is quite interesting from a legal standpoint. Interesting how your prenup protects Marcus's assets in case of divorce. But Elena, according to these business documents, Marcus doesn't have any significant assets. They're all legally yours, which means the prenuptial agreement is essentially meaningless. Elena felt something powerful stirring in her chest. Not quite hope yet, but something like control beginning to awaken. Helen, hypothetically, if I wanted to divorce Marcus, what would that process look like given this unusual situation? That depends entirely on what you want to accomplish. If you simply want out of the marriage, we file standard divorce papers and you retain everything that's legally yours, which appears to be everything significant. If you believe he's been defrauding you, we could pursue criminal charges for identity theft and financial fraud. And if I wanted to ensure he couldn't continue using me or my assets, Helen smiled, and it was not entirely pleasant. Elena, if these documents are accurate and complete, Marcus cannot hurt you financially anymore. You own everything. The only person who can make decisions about your financial future is you. Elena left the law office 3 hours later with copies of all the documents and a completely transformed understanding of her situation. She wasn't Marcus's victim. She was the unwitting owner of a business empire worth hundreds of millions of dollars. As she rode in a taxi back to the estate she apparently owned, Elena made several decisions. She was going to learn everything she could about running the empire that was legally hers. She was going to hire the best management consultants and financial advisors money could buy. And she was going to decide whether Marcus Wellington deserved any role in the future she was about to create. For the first time in 20 years, Elena Wellington understood that she held all the cards in this game. The only question now was how she wanted to play them. Marcus had spent 2 decades teaching her to be passive and trusting, but he had also given her legal control of everything he had built. It was time for Elena to get a very expensive education in just how dangerous a truly intelligent woman could be when she finally understood her own power. 2 weeks later, Elena sat at a corner table in Le Bernardin, one of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants, pretending to study the wine list while monitoring the entrance. She had been following Marcus for 5 days now, using surveillance techniques she had learned from a private investigator Helen Brooks had recommended for asset protection purposes. It was remarkable how invisible a wife could become when she wanted to be. 20 years of being overlooked had taught her exactly how to blend into the background of expensive Manhattan establishments. Marcus had told her he was having a crucial business dinner with potential investors from Tokyo. Elena had smiled supportively, kissed him goodbye at their Hamptons estate, and told him not to wait up since she had charity planning meetings that would run late. Then she had driven directly to the city and positioned herself to observe his actual evening plans. At 7:23 p.m., Marcus walked into Le Bernardin wearing his most expensive Tom Ford suit, looking every inch the successful billionaire entrepreneur. He spoke confidently to the hostess, his posture radiating the kind of power that came from controlling hundreds of millions of dollars in assets. But there were no Japanese investors waiting for him. Instead, a stunning blonde woman in her late 20s approached him with a smile that could have illuminated Times Square. She wore a red Hermes dress that probably cost more than most people's annual salary, and she kissed Marcus on the mouth with a familiarity that made Elena's stomach clench with recognition. Victoria Hayes. It had to be. Elena watched as they were seated at an intimate table across the restaurant, close enough for her to observe their body language, but far enough away to avoid detection. She ordered wine she couldn't taste and forced herself to eat food she couldn't feel, while Marcus and his girlfriend shared what was clearly a celebration dinner. They looked like lovers in the most obvious way. Victoria's hand constantly touched Marcus's arm. He leaned across the table to whisper in her ear, making her laugh at private jokes. They shared bites of each other's food and gazed into each other's eyes with an intimacy that Elena recognized from her own early relationship with Marcus. "Baby, when are you finally going to leave her?" Victoria asked, her voice carrying just far enough for Elena to catch the words over the restaurant's expensive ambiance. Elena's wine glass froze halfway to her lips. "Very soon, darling," Marcus replied, cutting his Wagyu beef with precise, satisfied movements. "Everything is almost in position. Another few months and we'll be completely free. The divorce settlement will destroy her financially, won't it?" Marcus's smile was cold and calculating. "That's exactly the point. Victoria, Elena thinks she's been getting smarter over the past few years with those pathetic online business courses, but she has absolutely no idea what she's actually signed. No comprehension of the financial web she's trapped in." Elena's heart pounded so loudly she was certain everyone in the restaurant could hear it. "And she'll end up with nothing but massive debt and legal liability," Marcus said with obvious satisfaction. 20 years of her signatures are about to pay off beautifully. She'll be financially destroyed and legally vulnerable, while we'll have access to liquid assets worth over $400 million. Victoria actually giggled at the prospect of another woman's complete destruction. "You're so brilliant, baby. She really doesn't suspect anything about us." "Elena is exactly what she's always been," Marcus said dismissively. "Beautiful, trusting, and completely naive about serious business matters. She signs whatever I put in front of her without reading it, just like she always has. The perfect wife for someone building what I've built." "What about that fabricated affair story will that hold up under legal scrutiny?" Marcus's expression darkened slightly. "There was a complication with the original plan. The man I hired to be her supposed lover developed an inconvenient conscience, apparently decided he couldn't participate in destroying an innocent woman. So what's your alternative strategy?" "I'm developing other options. Don't worry, darling. By the time I'm finished, Elena won't have a legal leg to stand on. Her own signatures will be used to prove she was involved in financial improprieties." Elena set down her wine glass with trembling hands, finally understanding the full scope of Marcus's plan. He wasn't just going to divorce her and steal the assets. He was going to frame her for financial crimes using the very documents she had signed in trust. "When do you think everything will be finalized?" Victoria asked. 6 months at the absolute outside," Marcus said confidently. "I want every detail to be legally airtight. Elena may be naive, but federal courts aren't. Everything has to appear completely legitimate. And then we can be together openly. No more hiding. No more sneaking around. Marcus reached across the table and took Victoria's perfectly manicured hand. Then we can be together with all the financial security we'll ever need. Elena will never be able to touch us or threaten our future. Elena watched her husband of 20 years promise another woman a life built on her complete destruction, and something crystallized inside her into diamond-hard determination. Marcus thought she was naive and trusting and easy to manipulate. He was about to learn exactly how wrong he was. She paid her bill in cash and left the restaurant before they finished their main courses, but not before hearing Marcus tell Victoria, "The beautiful thing about Elena is that she'll never see any of this coming. She trusts me so completely. She'd sign her own death warrant if I told her it was routine paperwork." As Elena sat in her Mercedes in the restaurant's parking lot, she realized something profound had shifted inside her. Marcus was absolutely right about one thing. The woman he had married 20 years ago would never have seen this coming. That woman had been naive and trusting and eager to please, but that woman no longer existed. The woman who had just listened to her husband plan her financial destruction and criminal prosecution while romancing his girlfriend was someone entirely different. Someone who legally owned 6 major corporations and had just learned exactly how to use that power. Elena started her car and drove back to the Hamptons estate she now knew belonged entirely to her, where Marcus would return later with lies about Japanese investors and promising business developments. She would smile and ask about his evening, and he would never suspect that everything had changed. But first, she had several phone calls to make. To Helen Brooks about expediting certain legal procedures, to the private investigator about documenting Marcus's relationship with Victoria Hayes, and to the management consulting firm about taking immediate operational control of her companies. If Marcus Wellington wanted to play games with her life and her future, it was time he learned that his naive little wife had become an extremely dangerous opponent. The war wasn't just beginning, it had been going on for 20 years. Elena was finally ready to start fighting back with weapons Marcus had unknowingly placed in her hands. His biggest mistake hadn't been underestimating her intelligence, it had been overestimating his own cleverness while teaching her exactly how ruthless, successful people could be. 1 week later, Elena stood outside the glass towers of Wellington Tech Solutions in Midtown Manhattan, watching the morning flow of employees entering what she now understood was her building. Her employees, she reminded herself. According to every legal document, every person walking through those doors worked for companies that belonged entirely to her. It was time to make that reality official. She had spent the week in intensive preparation with Helen Brooks and a team of corporate attorneys, reviewing every contract, understanding every legal nuance, and developing a comprehensive strategy. Elena was no longer the woman who signed papers without reading them. She was the legal owner of a business empire, and she was about to claim control of it. "Good morning, Mrs. Van Wellington," said the receptionist as Elena walked into the sleek lobby with its floor-to-ceiling windows and modern art installations. The young woman looked confused by Elena's unexpected appearance. "Do you have an appointment to see Mr. Wellington?" "No," Elena said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "But I'm certain he'll make time to see me. Let me call up to his office." "That won't be necessary," Elena said firmly. "I'll announce myself." She walked past the reception desk toward the elevators, ignoring the receptionist's protests. As the legal owner of the building, Elena decided she didn't need appointments to visit her own property. Marcus's corner office on the 42nd floor was everything she expected: expensive leather furniture, panoramic views of Manhattan, awards and photographs documenting his business success. He was on the phone when she entered without knocking, his back to the door as he gazed out at the city skyline. "I'll have to call you back," he said into his phone, turning around. His expression shifted from surprise to irritation when he saw her. "Elena, what are you doing here? You never come to my office." "That's because I never knew I owned it," she replied calmly, taking a seat in one of the leather chairs facing his desk without being invited. Marcus went very still. "What did you say?" "I said I own it. This office, this building, this company, and 5 others. It's amazing what you discover when you actually read the papers you've been signing for 20 years. Elena opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents, placing them deliberately on Marcus's polished desk. "Elena, what are you talking about?" But his voice had changed, taking on the careful tone he used during dangerous business negotiations. Wellington Tech Solutions, incorporated 8 years ago, with Elena Martinez Wellington as sole proprietor, she said, reading from the top document. Wellington Investment Partners, incorporated 6 years ago with Elena Martinez Wellington as primary owner. Wellington Pharmaceuticals, Wellington Real Estate Holdings, Wellington Media Group, Wellington Energy Systems. Should I continue? Marcus's face had gone pale. Those are just legal technicalities. Elena, tax structures. You know I run these companies. Actually, you don't, Elena said, her voice steady and cold. According to these power of attorney documents, you've been operating my companies using privileges I granted you. Privileges that I'm hereby officially revoking? She placed a formal legal document on his desk. That's from Helen Brooks, my attorney. Effective immediately. You no longer have any legal authority to make decisions for any company in which I hold ownership interest. Marcus stared at the document as if it were a venomous snake. Elena, you cannot be serious about this. I'm absolutely serious. Marcus, you don't understand business operations. Elena, you've never understood complex corporate management. These companies are worth hundreds of millions of dollars. You can't just take them away from me. Elena leaned back in her chair, studying her husband's face with new clarity. Marcus, let me ask you a direct question. Did you really think I would never find out what? About Victoria Hayes? About your plan to divorce me and claim I was having an affair? About your scheme to leave me with nothing but debt and legal liability while you and your girlfriend disappeared with all the liquid assets? Marcus's face went from pale to gray. Elena, whoever told you those things was lying to you? Was James Morrison lying when he called me at midnight 2 weeks ago? Was he lying when he explained exactly how you've been using me as a financial shield for 15 years? James had no right to. James had every right, Elena interrupted sharply. Because unlike you, James Morrison still possesses something resembling a conscience. Marcus, did you really believe you could systematically plan my destruction and I would never discover the truth? Marcus stood up abruptly, his voice rising with desperation. Elena, you're making a catastrophic mistake here. You don't know what you're doing. These companies require experienced leadership, sophisticated management systems. You can't just what? Elena's voice was razor sharp. Can't just take control of my own businesses. Can't just protect myself from a husband who's been systematically defrauding me for 2 decades. Can't just prevent you from using my legal identity to commit financial crimes. I never defrauded you, Marcus said, but his voice lacked any conviction. Really? Elena's tone was deadly quiet. Then explain to me how I came to legally own 6 major corporations that I knew nothing about. Explain how my signature appears on loan documents for hundreds of millions of dollars in corporate debt. Explain how you were planning to transfer all these assets to new companies in Victoria Hayes' name immediately before divorcing me. Marcus sat down heavily, the fight visibly draining out of him. How long have you known long enough? Elena said. Long enough to realize that my husband of 20 years has never seen me as a partner or even as a human being. I've been nothing more than a convenient signature to you, Marcus. A way to build wealth without accepting responsibility for the associated risks. Elena, it wasn't like that between us. Wasn't it? Elena's voice remained quiet but carried lethal intensity. Then tell me, Marcus, in 20 years of marriage, how many times have you asked for my opinion on a major business decision? How many times have you explained what I was signing? How many times have you treated me like an equal partner instead of a decorative accessory who happened to have useful legal credentials? Marcus said nothing. Exactly, Elena continued. You married me because I was young and trusting and stupid enough to sign whatever you placed in front of me. You built a financial empire using my legal identity while ensuring I never understood what was happening. And when you grew tired of me, you planned to dispose of me completely and keep everything for yourself and your girlfriend. What do you want, Elena? What I want is very simple, she said, standing up with decisive finality. I want you out of my companies, all of them, today, permanently. Elena, you can't run these businesses yourself. You don't have the experience, the industry knowledge, the relationships. Then I'll learn what I need to learn. Or I'll hire people who already know. Or I'll sell everything and start over with something completely different. Those are my choices to make, aren't they? Since I'm the actual owner. Marcus stared at her as if seeing her clearly for the first time in 20 years. You've changed, Elena. No, Marcus. I've finally stopped pretending to be the helpless, trusting woman you wanted me to be. This is who I actually am. You just never bothered to notice because it wasn't convenient for your plans. Elena picked up her briefcase and walked toward the door. Building security will be here within the hour to escort you out. Helen Brooks will contact you about divorce proceedings. Elena, wait. She turned back to look at him one final time. Marcus Wellington, the man she had loved and trusted for 20 years, looked small and defeated behind his expensive desk in what had been his corner office. Please, he said desperately, we can work this out reasonably. I'll give you half of everything. We can be real partners this time, I promise. Elena smiled, and this time it did reach her eyes. Marcus, you still don't understand the situation. There is no everything anymore for you to give me half of, and there never will be again, because you made one crucial mistake in all your careful planning. What mistake? You assumed I would always be too weak and too naive to fight back. You were wrong about everything. Elena walked out of the office and never looked back. Behind her, she could hear Marcus calling her name with increasing desperation, but she didn't stop or turn around. She had a business empire to take control of, and 20 years of lost time to make up for. The war was over. Elena had won before Marcus even realized they were fighting. Now came the really interesting part, deciding what to do with her victory. 3 months later, the Sotheby's auction house hummed with the energy of serious money-changing hands as Elena sat in the front row, watching potential buyers examine the assets of what the financial press had dubbed the Wellington Empire liquidation. She wore a tailored navy suit that projected quiet authority, her dark hair pulled back in a style that emphasized the sharp intelligence in her eyes. Mrs. Wellington, said David Reeves, the auction house director, approaching her with a leather portfolio. Wellington Pharmaceuticals just closed at $67 million. Combined with this morning's sales, that brings your total proceeds to $412 million. Elena nodded calmly, watching as another piece of Marcus's life work disappeared into someone else's business portfolio. She felt no satisfaction in the systematic destruction, but no regret either. These companies had never truly belonged to him. Her phone buzzed with yet another call from Marcus, the 15th that day. Elena, please. His voice was raw with desperation when she answered. We need to talk about what you're doing. This is insane. Those companies took me 20 years to build. No, Marcus, Elena said quietly, stepping away from the auction room's noise. Those companies took me 20 years to unknowingly finance and legally guarantee. There's a significant difference. You can't just destroy everything we built together. Think about the employees, all the people whose jobs depend on these businesses continuing to operate. I am thinking about them, Elena replied. That's why I negotiated employment protection clauses with every buyer. Unlike you, I actually care about the people who work for these companies, not just the profits they generate. Elena, I'll give you anything you want. Everything. Just stop this liquidation. Elena looked around the auction house at the organized dismantling of a business empire built on 20 years of deception and financial manipulation. Marcus, you don't have anything to give me. You never did. Everything was always legally mine. What about Victoria? Marcus's voice cracked completely. She left me. Did you know that the moment she realized the money was disappearing, she was gone, just completely gone? Elena felt a brief flicker of something that might have been pity. I'm sorry, Marcus, but surely you understood that a relationship built on stolen assets wouldn't survive once those assets were no longer available. So what happens now? You destroy everything I spent 2 decades building, and then what? You've never run a business operation in your life. Elena. You're absolutely right, Elena said. I've never run a business before these past few months, but I've discovered something very interesting about myself. What's that? I'm exceptionally good at it. This was the truth Elena had been reluctant to admit even to herself. Working with Helen Brooks and a team of financial advisors, she had not only successfully liquidated Marcus's empire, but had done so at valuations far higher than anyone had projected. She had discovered a natural instinct for business strategy that had been suppressed for 20 years, but not eliminated. Elena, please, can we meet somewhere neutral? Can we discuss this like two civilized adults who once loved each other? Elena considered this request. All right, Marcus, let's meet tomorrow at noon. The same coffee shop where we first met 20 years ago. It seems symbolically appropriate. The next day, Marcus was already waiting when Elena arrived at the Manhattan Starbucks, looking older and more exhausted than she had ever seen him. The expensive custom suits were gone, replaced by off-the-rack clothing that looked strange on his once powerful frame. He had lost weight, and his usually perfect hair was disheveled. "You look successful," he said quietly as she sat down across from him at their old corner table. "Confident, like someone who's finally found her place in the world?" "I have found my place," Elena replied. "For the first time in my adult life, I'm successful because of my own work and decisions, not because I'm attached to someone else's achievements. Elena, I want you to know that I never intended for things to go as far as they did. The plan with Victoria, the divorce scheme, I was never actually going to follow through with destroying you completely." Elena studied his face carefully. "Do you actually believe that, Marcus? Or do you just think I'm still naive enough to believe it?" Marcus looked down at his hands. "I loved you, Elena. I still love you, despite everything that's happened." "No," Elena said with quiet firmness. "You loved what I could do for you. You loved having a wife who would sign whatever you put in front of her without asking questions. You loved having someone to absorb the financial risks while you enjoyed the profits. That's not love, Marcus. That's exploitation. So what happens now? What's your plan going forward?" Elena reached into her purse and pulled out a certified check, placing it on the table between them. "This is for $10 million. It's enough for you to start over legitimately, if that's what you choose to do, or to disappear quietly and leave me alone permanently." Marcus stared at the check in amazement. "Why would you give me anything after what I did to you? Because despite everything you did to me over 20 years, I'm not you. I don't enjoy destroying people, even people who tried to destroy me first." Marcus reached for the check, then hesitated. "What are the conditions?" "You sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement about our marriage and divorce. You never attempt to contact me again under any circumstances. And if I ever discover you're running another financial manipulation scheme like the one you used on me, I'll ensure that every business publication in the country knows exactly what kind of man Marcus Wellington really is. And if I refuse to take your money, then you leave here with nothing, exactly as you planned for me to end up. The difference is, I actually have the power and resources to make that outcome permanent." Marcus signed the legal papers Elena placed in front of him and took the check with trembling hands. "I really did love you, Elena. In my own way, I meant it." "I know you did," Elena said, and she meant it. "But your way of loving was never enough for me, and it certainly wasn't enough for a real marriage between equals." As Marcus left the coffee shop, Elena remained at the table where their story had begun 20 years earlier. But this time, she wasn't a naive young woman looking for someone to take care of her and build her dreams. She was a successful entrepreneur who had learned to take care of herself and create her own vision for the future. Her phone buzzed with a text from Helen Brooks. "Foundation Incorporation approved. Welcome to official philanthropy." Elena smiled genuinely for the first time in months. Second Chances Financial, her foundation dedicated to helping women over 50 achieve financial independence after divorce or financial abuse, was about to become a reality. She was going to invest the $400 million she had remaining after paying Marcus to ensure no other woman ever found herself in the position she had been trapped in for 20 years. She was going to teach women to read legal documents before signing them. She was going to show them how to protect their own financial interests. She was going to prove that it was never too late to stop being someone else's victim and start being your own advocate and hero. Elena finished her coffee and left the coffee shop for what she knew would be the final time. But this time, she was walking towards something she had built entirely herself, something that belonged to her completely, something that could never be taken away because she finally understood her own power. The empire Marcus had built was gone forever, but Elena had discovered something far more valuable in the process. She had discovered exactly who she was when she stopped being who someone else needed her to be. And that discovery was worth more than all the money in the world. 6 months later, the private hospital room was quiet except for the soft beeping of monitors and the gentle sounds of Elena's newborn daughter sleeping peacefully in her arms. Isabella Elena Wellington had arrived 3 weeks early. As if she couldn't wait to enter the world her mother was systematically rebuilding from scratch. "She's absolutely perfect," Sarah whispered, settling carefully into the chair beside Elena's bed. "Look at those tiny fingers. She's going to be as strong as her mother." Elena gazed down at her daughter's perfect face, marveling at how someone so small could make her feel so completely transformed and purposeful. "I can't believe she's finally here. Sarah, after everything that's happened this year, how are you feeling emotionally? I mean, this has been an incredible year of changes." "Tired but happy, terrified but excited." Elena laughed softly. "All the emotions you're supposed to feel when your entire life has been completely rebuilt. I suppose." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, fidgeting with the baby blanket in her lap. Elena had known her best friend for over 20 years, long enough to recognize when Sarah was struggling with something important. "Sarah, what's wrong? You've been acting strangely for weeks. There's something you want to tell me." Sarah took a deep breath, her eyes filling with tears. "Elena, there's something about Marcus that I should have told you long ago. Something my brother David discovered during his investigation that changes everything we thought we knew." Elena's stomach clenched with familiar dread. "What about Marcus now? Do you remember when I first told you about seeing me with David outside those law offices? When I explained that Marcus had hired him to create a fake affair scenario?" "Yes, of course. That's what started this entire discovery process." "That part was true. But Elena, what I never told you was the full scope of what David uncovered when he started investigating Marcus's background." Elena shifted the baby carefully, giving Sarah her complete attention. "What did David find?" Sarah's tears started flowing freely. "Elena, Marcus wasn't just planning to frame you for having an affair to invalidate your prenup. He was developing a much more elaborate scheme to destroy you completely." "More elaborate how?" 3 years ago, Marcus hired David to help Victoria Hayes obtain permanent residency through a fraudulent marriage arrangement. But not marriage to Marcus himself, a fake marriage to you. Elena stared at her friend in complete confusion. "That's impossible. I was already married to Marcus." "That's what I thought too, until David showed me the documentation." Sarah's voice dropped to a whisper. "Elena, Marcus never legally filed your marriage certificate. For 20 years, you've been living as his girlfriend, not his legal wife." The room seemed to tilt sideways around Elena. "That's absolutely impossible. David has all the legal documentation. Marcus kept your signed marriage certificate, but never submitted it to the state. Every document you signed as Elena Wellington, every business incorporation, every loan agreement, it's all potentially fraudulent because you were never legally married to Marcus Wellington." Elena felt like she couldn't breathe properly. "But the divorce papers, the settlement we negotiated, all meaningless. Elena, you can't legally divorce someone you were never married to in the first place." The baby stirred slightly in Elena's arms, making soft sounds, and she automatically began rocking gently. The familiar motion helped her think through the staggering implications of what Sarah was revealing. "So when Marcus was planning to claim I was having an affair, he was going to say you had entered into a fraudulent marriage arrangement with David to help Victoria get citizenship, while simultaneously pretending to be married to him for 20 years. It would have made you appear to be running a sophisticated immigration fraud scheme, which is a federal crime with serious prison time." Elena closed her eyes, finally understanding the complete scope of Marcus's betrayal. "And while I was being investigated and potentially prosecuted for federal crimes, he would have had time to transfer all the business assets to his legitimate companies." "Exactly right. But Elena, David couldn't participate in destroying an innocent woman's life. When he fully understood what Marcus was planning, he refused to continue and began documenting everything Marcus had told him." "Why didn't you tell me this earlier?" "Sarah, this is enormous." Sarah wiped her eyes with a tissue. "Because David was terrified. Elena, Marcus had threatened him directly, said if he ever revealed what he knew, Marcus would ensure David lost his law license and faced disbarment. But after everything that's happened, after seeing what you've accomplished, David decided he couldn't stay silent any longer." Elena looked down at Isabella, this perfect little person who would grow up in a world where her mother was strong and independent and would never again be anyone's victim or unknowing accomplice. Sarah, where is David now? I need to speak with him directly. He's outside in the waiting area. He wanted to apologize to you personally and give you all the documentation he's been secretly maintaining. Please ask him to come in. 5 minutes later, a tall man with dark hair and genuinely kind eyes knocked softly on the hospital room door. Elena could see the family resemblance to Sarah immediately. But more than that, she could see the weight of guilt he had been carrying. Mrs. Wellington, I'm David Chen. I owe you the most sincere apology of my life. You can call me Elena. David, and you don't owe me any apology. You potentially saved me from federal prison. David sat down heavily in the second visitor chair. I should have told you immediately when I first realized what Marcus was planning. Instead, I was protecting my own career while you were being systematically destroyed. You were protecting yourself from a dangerous man. I completely understand that, David. No, you don't understand the full situation yet. David pulled out a thick manila folder. Elena, I didn't just refuse to participate in Marcus's scheme. I've been actively investigating him for over 2 years. What he did to you, the way he manipulated your legal identity and finances. It's part of a documented pattern. Elena's blood ran cold. What kind of pattern? Marcus Wellington has done this exact same thing before, multiple times. I can document at least 3 other cases of successful, trusting women who ended up financially destroyed after relationships with Marcus. Elena stared at the photographs David placed on her hospital tray. 3 women, all intelligent and attractive, all bearing expressions of confused devastation that Elena recognized from her own darkest moments of discovery. What happened to them? Jennifer Morrison in Seattle, 14 years ago. She declared bankruptcy and lost her house. Catherine Hayes in Chicago, 9 years ago. She lost her business and had to move back with her parents. Maria Santos in Miami, 5 years ago. She completely disappeared, changed her name and started over somewhere else. And Victoria Hayes is Catherine's younger sister. Elena, I believe Victoria was working with Marcus from the very beginning of your relationship. This entire 20-year marriage was a carefully orchestrated long-term fraud, and you were never meant to be the wife. You were always intended to be the mark. Elena looked at her sleeping daughter and felt a fury unlike anything she had ever experienced, not just for herself, but for all the women Marcus had systematically destroyed in his pursuit of wealth and power without consequences. David, do you have enough evidence to take this to federal authorities? More than enough for multiple prosecutions. But Elena, pursuing this legally will mean extensive publicity and detailed examination of all your business dealings over the past 20 years. I don't care about publicity, Elena said firmly. Marcus needs to be stopped permanently. And those other women deserve to know they weren't alone, that they weren't stupid, and that what happened to them was part of a criminal pattern. As David and Sarah left to let Elena rest with her new daughter, she looked down at Isabella and made a solemn promise. You're going to grow up in a world where women don't get systematically victimized like this, she whispered to her sleeping child. Your mother is going to make sure of that. The victory Elena had thought was complete was actually just the beginning of something much larger. She had saved herself, but now it was time to save others and ensure Marcus could never destroy another woman's life. This time, she wouldn't be fighting alone. And this time, she had resources, knowledge, and legal evidence that could put Marcus away for the rest of his life. The real war was just beginning, and Elena finally had all the weapons she needed to win it permanently. 2 years later, the same Manhattan coffee shop buzzed with an entirely different energy than it had 22 years earlier. Where once there had been the typical morning rush of individual customers grabbing coffee and hurrying to their separate lives, now there were purposeful clusters of women ranging in age from their 40s to their 70s. Laptops open, business plans spread across tables, voices animated with possibility and mutual support. Elena sat at her familiar corner booth, but everything else about her life had been transformed beyond recognition. She wore a perfectly tailored sapphire blue blazer that projected quiet authority, her hair styled in a confident shorter cut, and her eyes held the sharp awareness of someone who had learned to see the world with complete clarity. Isabella. now a spirited toddler with dark curls and her mother's determined expression, sat contentedly in her high chair beside the table, babbling cheerfully at anyone who would listen and occasionally clapping her hands when the women around them celebrated small business victories. The Seattle program is reporting 22 new businesses launched this quarter, Sarah announced, sliding into the booth across from them with her tablet and a genuine smile that had replaced the worried expression she had worn for so many months. And Elena, 5 of the women from our Chicago initiative just received approval for their first major business expansion loans. Elena smiled with the kind of deep satisfaction she had rarely experienced during her marriage to her millionaire ex-husband. That's incredible progress. Sarah, what about our legal advocacy program? Even better news, Sarah replied, pulling up detailed reports on her screen. David's legal team has successfully recovered over $47 million in assets for women who were victims of financial abuse or narcissistic manipulation. And Elena, the Marcus Wellington federal trial concluded last week. Good, Elena said simply, bouncing Isabella on her lap. It's finally over. The past 2 years had been an extraordinary whirlwind of building something completely new from scratch. Second Chances Financial had evolved from Elena's personal mission of survival into a nationwide organization helping women over 40 achieve genuine financial independence after divorce, financial abuse, or economic manipulation. The foundation offered comprehensive business training, sophisticated legal advocacy, startup funding, mentorship programs, and most importantly, the kind of supportive community network Elena wished she had access to during her own midlife transformation. Mama, Isabella said clearly, pointing toward the coffee shop entrance. Elena looked up to see Jennifer Morrison walking through the door, the first woman David had identified as one of Marcus's previous victims. Jennifer had been financially destroyed by Marcus 15 years earlier, but with extensive help from Elena's foundation, she had completely rebuilt her life and was now running a thriving consulting firm that specialized in helping other women recover from financial abuse. Elena, Jennifer said, approaching their table with a confident smile that still carried traces of old pain, but was filled with hard-won strength and purpose. I wanted to thank you one more time before I fly back to Seattle tonight. Jennifer, you know you don't need to thank me. We helped each other survive and thrive. No, Jennifer said firmly, settling into the booth beside Sarah. You saved my life. Elena, when David first contacted me about Marcus 2 years ago, I thought I was the only woman stupid enough to fall for his lies and manipulation. I thought I was alone and pathetic. But you showed me that what happened to all of us wasn't our fault, and more importantly, you proved that surviving wasn't enough. We could actually build something better. This was the aspect of her new work that Elena treasured most deeply. Not just helping women recover from financial abuse and narcissistic relationships, but watching them discover their own hidden power and capabilities. Jennifer had not only rebuilt her own life from nothing, but was now successfully mentoring dozens of other women through similar recovery processes. How many women are participating in the Seattle program now? Elena asked with genuine curiosity. 68 active participants, Jennifer replied proudly. And Elena, I have important news. Catherine Hayes wants to join our organization as a regional coordinator. Elena's eyebrows rose with interest. Victoria's older sister, former sister, Jennifer corrected firmly. Catherine legally changed her name and severed all family ties with Victoria after she learned the complete truth about the con games they were running. She wants to dedicate her life to helping other women avoid what we all experienced. Elena considered this carefully. Catherine Hayes had been Marcus's victim 9 years earlier, but she was also the biological sister of the woman who had actively helped Marcus plan Elena's complete destruction. It would be complicated to integrate her into their organization, but Elena had learned that most worthwhile endeavors were inherently complicated. Set up a comprehensive meeting, Elena decided. Everyone deserves an opportunity for redemption and second chances. As Jennifer left to catch her flight, Elena's phone buzzed with a text message from Helen Brooks. Final verdict delivered. Marcus convicted on all federal charges, 28 years in federal prison. Victoria sentenced to 18 years. Justice completely served. Elena showed the message to Sarah, who let out a small cheer of victory that made Isabella clap her hands enthusiastically in response. It's finally finished, Sarah said with obvious relief. No, Elena replied thoughtfully. watching her daughter play with colorful blocks. This is just the beginning of something much more important. Over the past 2 years, Elena had learned that her personal story wasn't unique or unusual. Thousands of women found themselves in similar situations every year, systematically manipulated by partners who weaponize love and trust as tools for financial abuse and control. But Elena had also discovered something else that gave her tremendous hope. Women were incredibly resilient and capable when they were given proper support, resources, and community. "Elena," said a familiar voice behind her. She turned to see Maria Santos, the third woman on David's list of Marcus's victims, the one who had completely disappeared after Marcus destroyed her life 6 years earlier. She looked older now, her hair streaked with distinguished silver, but her eyes held a familiar fire of determination. "Maria," Elena said warmly, standing to embrace her. "I'm so grateful you decided to come today." "I almost didn't," Maria admitted honestly. "When David first contacted me 18 months ago, I thought it might be another elaborate scam. I've been hiding from the world for so long. I had forgotten what it felt like to trust anyone about anything." "And how do you feel now?" Maria smiled genuinely for the first time Elena had witnessed. "Now I think I'm finally ready to stop hiding and start fighting back against people like Marcus." This was exactly why Elena had built Second Chances Financial and dedicated her life to this work. Not for personal revenge against Marcus, though his federal conviction had felt deeply satisfying and necessary. She had created this organization because she finally understood something profound. Women supporting women was genuinely the most powerful transformative force in the world. "Ladies," Elena announced to the coffee shop filled with women working intensively on their business dreams and personal recovery, "I'd like to propose a toast to celebrate Maria joining our community." The conversations throughout the space quieted as women looked up from their laptops, business plans, and mentoring sessions. Elena raised her coffee cup with ceremonial intention. "To second chances and new beginnings. To discovering that it's never too late to stop being someone else's victim and start being your own hero. To the liberating truth that sets us free, even when it arrives 20 years later than we wished. To second chances." The entire room echoed back with genuine enthusiasm. As Elena settled back into her seat with Isabella babbling happily beside her and her chosen family of strong, resilient women surrounding her, she thought about the naive young woman who had first sat in this exact coffee shop 24 years earlier. That woman had been desperately searching for someone to take care of her, someone to build her dreams for her, someone to provide the security and success she didn't believe she could create herself. This woman had learned to take care of herself and, more importantly, to help others do the same. "Mama," Isabella said clearly, pointing out the large windows at the bustling city beyond. "Yes, sweetheart," Elena said, following her daughter's gaze toward the Manhattan skyline. "That's our world out there, and we're going to make it significantly better for women." Elena had spent 20 years believing she was building something meaningful with someone she loved. What she had actually been doing was unknowingly building someone else's dreams and wealth on the foundation of her own misplaced trust. But the day she realized that every signature she had given away was actually a signature she could reclaim and use for her own purposes, that was the day she stopped being Marcus's victim and started being her own hero. Her phone buzzed with another message, this time from David Chen. Federal prosecutors estimate Marcus and Victoria defrauded at least 12 women over 15 years. Total recovery for victims now exceeds $80 million. You started something that saved a lot of lives. Elena looked around at the thriving community of women who had transformed this ordinary coffee shop into an extraordinary center for female empowerment and financial independence. She had learned something invaluable sometimes. The best revenge wasn't getting even with people who had wronged you. Sometimes the best revenge was getting everything you never knew you deserved, and then using that power and success to ensure other people got what they deserved too. Elena Wellington had finally built her empire, but this empire was different from Marcus's in every way that mattered. This empire was built to lift others up, not tear them down. This empire was built on truth and mutual support, not lies and exploitation. This empire was built to last because it served something larger than one person's greed. And most importantly, this empire belonged to all of them together. as the afternoon sun streamed through the coffee shop windows, illuminating the faces of women who had refused to let their stories end with victimization. Elena felt a deep sense of completion. She had taken the worst experience of her life and transformed it into the foundation for helping others avoid or escape similar experiences. "You know what I've learned," Elena said to Sarah as they watched Isabella play contentedly. "What's that?" "I spent 20 years thinking I was powerless, but I was actually just unconscious. The power was always there. I just needed to wake up and learn how to use it." Isabella looked up at her mother and smiled, as if she understood that she was growing up in a world where women knew their own strength, and that made all the difference.